Welcome to Make Things That Matter, the podcast where we explore impactful products and the cultures that create them. I'm your host, Andrew Scottsko, and if I'm doing my job well, each episode of this show will help you to do meaningful work, make things that make things better, and have a great experience doing it. My guest in this conversation is Randy Silver, a fellow product and leadership coach and one of the true weavers of the global product community. Randy is the co-host and founder of the Product Experience podcast, runs the Product in the Ether meetup, and wrote What Do We Do Now? A product manager's guide to strategy in the time of crisis. Now, prior to all this advisory work, Randy spent years in the trenches in head of product roles. And in this conversation, we discuss the perceptual issues that can undercut your product team. We discuss how to think about making better decisions faster, how to balance authority and influence, and how to level up our ability to collaborate under intense revenue pressure like many folks in our field are feeling right now. So with all that and more, I give you the one and only Randy Silver. Randy, my friend, welcome to the show. It's great to be with you. How you doing?
I'm doing all right. Thanks for the invite.
Absolutely. I always enjoy our time together. One of the things I wanted to start off this conversation is, I think you have one of the more interesting backgrounds of any of the product people I've met. Not that there is a typical product background, but I believe you were a music journalist for quite a while, right?
I was, and I know so many people who were musicians or DJs and other stuff before getting into this, but yeah, I was on the other side of it. I came out of school with an arts degree in biology and journalism, and somehow used that to become a music journalist for about 10 years.
Right on. What kind of music were you covering?
I did everything except for blues and classical and jazz, really. I was Amazon's first hip hop and children's music editor.
Okay.
I did lots of rock and indie stuff, did folk, I did alternative country, I did dance. I had a lot of fun.
That does sound fun. Wait, so I'm curious, do you have affinity for all those different genres, or how do you translate your ability to critique that many genres? Because I know 2 genres, not 12.
I'm not going to say I'm an expert in all of them. I think actually it's one of the things that got me into doing this and the weird transition from music to product. Part of it was when I was asked to be Amazon's hip hop editor, my knowledge was an affinity, not a deep knowledge. I may not have been the best person they ever hired for that role. But what I was really good at was hiring other people and helping to make prioritization decisions about what we should cover, listening to them, taking recommendations. So one of the things I'm proudest of from that part of my career is somebody wrote into Amazon's customer service saying, hey, I'd love to write for you guys. They put him in touch with me. Turned out he went to my high school, and so some nepotism there, but he had some quality stuff. And I said, yeah, why not? I'll give you a try. And that led to more and more and more. And I'm not sure where he is now. I've lost track of him, but for a while he was one of the lead music writers for the New York Times.
Wow.
And I gave him his first paying gig. So, it's that kind of thing that I really enjoyed. And I was able to identify with our customers. Amazon in the late 90s, the profile of their hip hop buyer was not someone who was a lot more knowledgeable than I was.
That makes a lot of sense. It's really interesting just even hearing that little vignette because, in the time that you and I have known each other, a couple themes that have stood out to me very strongly about you already show up just in that story from, way back then, which is you're very community oriented, you're very relational, and you're also, you're really good at communicating with people. And those are all things that I think are very great qualities that you bring to the product space. But it's just so interesting to hear that that just seems like that's part of how you roll and how you always have.
Well, to be honest, I was an okay writer, but I think I was a pretty good editor. I was good at assigning people to things that I thought they'd be a good match for. And I was good at working with the writers, the other editors, the designers, the developers, helping them all put stuff together that, we'd assign out different stories, they'd work on different bits, and they would all come together and we tried to make something into a cohesive whole that greater than the sum of its parts and was trying to delight our customers, our users, our readers. And same thing when I was working at magazines and in print, same thing when I was doing it for Amazon. And I realized as my career went on, I think I still do the same job. It's not really any different from that perspective. It's how do you get a whole bunch of people to work better together to create something that's delightful and useful and of interest to customers.
Yeah.
Same thing, different toys, different techniques, but same attitude.
I love what you're pointing at here because, for me, that really is pointing at something that I think isn't talked about that much in our space. Like we talk a lot about the craft of product management, right? And especially when you're the product manager, you're the PM, you're owning some, feature set or perhaps even a whole product or whatever your scope may be. What we don't talk about very much is product editing and that aspect as you move into higher, a little more senior roles, right? And you're no longer necessarily the front line of it, but it's not really talked about too much. So I'm curious, how do you, when you think about that, like how did your time as a journalistic editor shape your work as a product editor?
Yeah, I think it's not just journalism. I've seen this in other places too. There's a guy, I'm probably going to butcher his name, the pronunciation of his name. It's Javier Grillo Marwa. And he is a showrunner out in LA. Mm-hmm. He worked on Lost. He worked on Dark Crystal, a bunch of other shows. And he put out this free 25-page PDF, and I'll give you the link later. It's called The 11 Laws of Showrunning. And this is one of my Bibles. I absolutely love this because everything he does in developing a TV show and trying to tell people how to be a good showrunner is pretty much the same thing we do in product. The biggest difference is, they make a story decision and they have to, support the decisions that they made, but they don't have to support the legacy code. So there's not so much of the same kind of technical debt. They have story and decision debt, but not the same level of technical debt that we might have. They don't have to maintain it in the same way. But all these other things, make decisions early and often, know what your show is and communicate it regularly, expect varying levels of competence from people. All these other things, these 11 laws, they're so relevant to what we do. And he says it better than I do. So I'll just reference him.
Yeah, I remember when you first told me about that. I went and I read it a couple of months ago, and it's funny. I have it teed up on my iPad to read tonight anyway. So I'm so glad that you brought this up again. And it occurred to me, one of the things that also we talk about a lot is that, product management is a role with high responsibility and low authority, right? Like we're responsible for a lot, but we do not have tons of formal power. Is that different in the sort of these other editing spaces you're talking about, whether it's journalism or show running or whatever? Like it occurs to me that like a showrunner on a if you're an executive producer on a TV show or something, you'd probably have a lot of power.
Yeah, in TV, I think you might do. But, think about if you're the person who wrote the script for a film, you're generally out of the room by the time they start production.
True.
TV is a little bit different, but, there's a lot going on there. I think ultimately what it comes down to is if you don't own P&L or have some input into it, then you're not really all that respected for these things. You're just seen as a cost center and not a profit center, no matter how good your ideas are, no matter what you're working on. So the real challenge is, the language we speak is one around costs. And how do you change the perception? How do you communicate and have a better relationship with the rest of the business to be a real partner rather than a client, or a cost center, or a service center within the business?
100%. It's funny. This is very relevant to a topic you and I were talking about last week in an article that I'm about to put out. Probably by the time this episode releases, it'll be live. So we'll link to all this stuff in the show notes. But yeah, I cannot agree with you more strongly. If the listener could see me, I'm nodding like a bobblehead here. But yeah, it's this idea that like I guess the way I think about it is like we love to talk about, it's like we want all the freedom with none of the responsibility. We've been talking about empowerment for years, at least 4 years since Josh Seiden published his book, Outcomes Over Output. We've been chanting that like this sort of sacred mantra. And then when sometimes the accountability piece comes around, we don't like it so much. And we're like, oh, wait, I have to be accountable for like revenue impact or ROI or so. Like, wait, what?
I think sometimes the frustration is you see something, you see an opportunity. You're a product manager for an area, or you're head of product for one part, for a product or a piece of something. And you spend all day in it. You know every single thing that's wrong with it. You know every single opportunity to squeeze more usage, more revenue, more, just to make it better. And so you have the list of things that are going to get you, let's make up a number. If I invest the next month or two in this, I'm going to make us an extra $5 million this year. And that's brilliant. Think about the bonus you're going to get for bumping up revenue for $5 million. What you don't know is the team down the hall needs the same amount of effort, the same amount of resources. I hate calling people resources, but you know what I mean. The same amount of investment.
Yeah.
And their idea is going to generate 50 million.
Mm-hmm.
And you feel bad when they're chosen, they get supported instead of you, because it's almost like an insult to you that they got chosen and your ideas, no one sees your genius and what your team generates. And the problem is we're not working together very well. We should be, clubbing up with them on how do we make that 50 million opportunity work? How can we contribute to that? And after we finish all the 50 million opportunities, then we should get the 5 million opportunities done. Obviously, this is based on effort and all kinds of other stuff, but all things being equal, I'd rather do the 50 million one than the 5 million one if I'm the CFO, if I'm the CEO. And if you were sitting in a different seat, so would you.
Exactly. Yeah. The one of the things that you and I were speaking about recently that's top of mind for me in this is language, right? We were talking about how we have to change our language. God, we love our jargon in product. We love it. It's like, guess what? No one cares. They do not care. Like, we have to speak the language of business. Like, how about, ROI, profit, market share, revenue, expected value, right? Like, it's like, if we can't actually articulate in a measurable way the impact of what we're doing, it's like, can we really complain that much about not getting a seat at the table? Like, honestly.
Yeah. Part of the problem with this is it's some of that language that business uses is just as actually, let me ask, do you mind if I curse on this or no?
Oh, fire away.
Okay. So some of the language that we use in business is also bullshit.
Totally.
We say some of those terms about expected revenue, expected value, things like that. And a lot of times that's just made up on a spreadsheet. No one really knows. It's the illusion of control that people are going for.
Yep.
And we spend all our time doing experimentation and discovery and things like that to try and nail it down and try and reduce the losses, reduce the problems that we're going to have along the way. There are actually terms that people in other parts of the business use to do this. Georgie Smallwood, who's at Moonpig these days, she had this great line at the Mind the Product Leadership meetup a couple weeks back, or a couple months back now, where she talked about, she was working with a group of people and she had convinced them that discovery was really worth doing. And they had made time for her and the team to do it. And that lasted for about 20 minutes. And then they started saying, why aren't you just getting on with it? Why aren't you doing stuff? And she realized they didn't, even though she'd spent a lot of time and invested in explaining what discovery was and why it was important, they didn't get it. So she stopped saying discovery and she started saying due diligence.
I love it.
And there's no difference really between product due diligence and product discovery. It's just they would never move forward on any project without doing their due diligence.
Exactly.
As soon as she started speaking their language, they got, oh, okay, it's that.
Oh, I get, yeah, right. It's like because language is a hook into mental models. And so if we are not hooking into the mental models of our peers and our collaborators in other parts of the business, like, come on, of course, like we need to meet them where they are, I think is the simplest way to say it, right? If they speak a different language, like, guess what? In product, we're always translators anyway. So translate.
Yeah, it's changing the perception of you as a call center, of you as a service, as you as the other or an impediment to getting things done, to being a partner and being someone that they really trust.
Yeah, no, I'm so glad we're going here because this is, we're going to link to all this in the show notes, but you gave a great talk at Mind the Product recently about sort of this sort of 4P framework you had of priorities, people, process, but then really it's about perception. So I'd love you to just tee that up briefly and then let's keep exploring and see where this takes us.
Yeah, and thank you, by the way. So for ages and ages, I thought I was good at my job because I was able to understand what are the priorities that we should be working on and try and ensure that we're only working on the things that were really important and not working on the things that weren't. So we were able to, as John Kugler says, we were able to limit our work in progress. We were able to concentrate and work on things. And not perfectly, but, I knew what we should be doing most of the time. And then I like to think I'm pretty good with people, and I hired some good people. I empowered people. I worked with them well. I didn't just, empower them by letting them be autonomous. I let them be autonomous within boundaries. They knew what their limits were. They knew how to communicate and collaborate with other people. We tried to create an environment where the teams could succeed. And so that was working pretty well. And then we went to work on our processes, because there's nothing worse than a team that knows what it's supposed to do, has all the right people, has all the right possibilities for it, and then is stuck doing, just so much admin that they don't actually get anything out the door. So, understand what you do, get the right people, and make sure that they have the ability to ship value.
Mm-hmm.
And for the longest time, I thought I was really good at my job because I did those three things. And I kept running into the same brick wall over and over and over again. And it took me a long time to realize that there is a fourth thing. It's that the fourth P of perception. And this one's fundamental. This one underpins everything else. And it's, if your partners, whether they're other product teams, whether they're your boss or a stakeholder, whether it's sales or marketing or legal, it doesn't matter who it is. If they don't agree that you're working on the right things, or that you've got the right people, because you're only as good as the weakest person on your team as far as they're concerned. If they don't agree that the processes you're doing are adding value to them, then it doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to find a way to make sure that you're working not just the right way according to our books. And again, at the MTP leadership, Matt LeMay had a great line about, it doesn't matter if you do it by the book, grow the fuck up and do the job that, your job is to deliver value, period, to help the company be more successful for whatever definition of success you're going to have, whether it's usage, whether it's revenue, whatever it is. That is your job. If you aren't doing that, it does not matter.
Bingo. Yeah, no, I can't agree more strongly. And that echoes everything I wrote in that piece that we were just talking about. It's funny. I actually had a line in there that I think I cut from an early draft that literally just said, grow the fuck up. Like, stop whining, grow the fuck up. Yeah, no, I love what you're pointing to, because it also reminds me of our mutual friend, Alan Albert, who is brilliant at value discovery and value-based pricing. And it's, this thing is like, in all of our spreadsheets and all of our analytical approaches to what we do and all that stuff, like you were saying earlier about, expected value, or fill in your business term here, we forget that at the end of the day, value is basically subjective. And if it is not perceived, it literally does not exist for that person, for the perceiver, right? Two people can perceive the same shared quote unquote reality in utterly different ways, and therefore it doesn't exist in their reality. And it's like, we just forget that because we're too close to it, I think.
Yeah, we get really lost in the weeds on things all the time. And this is the thing, being able to step back is hard. We're so busy all the time. People don't like to share information. Finding a way to build those relationships, to get that understanding, to really become as I keep saying, a trusted partner at the right levels. Mm-hmm. It's hard work.
Yeah. Yeah. This stuff is not easy. It's like this idea that, if you want to oversimplify it a little bit, it's like, well, we have these, sometimes we perceive these partners who are, let's say, skeptical of the value of product. Sometimes they're fair. It's fair that they're skeptical because they're not perceiving the value. And it's like, well, if that's there, we can almost oversimplify to say there's one of two things happening. Either A, they are not perceiving the value that we are actually creating, in which case this is like a communications and perception problem. Or B, we're actually not creating that much value. And we need neither of these is acceptable. And so it's like, whichever one it is, we got to deal with that.
Rich Mironov has a really good story about how when he goes into to companies, if sales is selling the wrong thing, if they're coming in with requirements that don't align to the roadmap, they're trying to turn things into a feature factory, just give us this and we can close this sale kind of thing. First thing he does is he pulls their bonus measures and takes a look at that. And if what sales is trying to do is generate short-term revenue deals of any kind, but not what the company has agreed is the long-term plan of what the ideal customer profile is, of what they're trying to sell, then he sits down with the CEO and rewrites the bonusable measures for the sales team. I mean, obviously this is an ideal situation. Rich is great. He's done this stuff a lot over the years. You can't do that when your company is in existential crisis mode and just needs the next deal to make payroll in a couple of months. Right. Obviously, you there's always an it depends kind of answer on this stuff. But if you've got a healthy enough runway, if you're trying to do the right thing, if everyone's agreed to go to the next level, this is the kind of stuff you have to do as a grown up.
100%. Yeah. No, I remember when he shared that with me, when I had him on the show, and I loved that move. And it's also like, well, looking at their incentive structures and what they get, what they get commission on. It's like, well, if they're getting commission on like services revenue, well, guess what? We're going to end up with a lot of like customization and work that is not the kind of product work we want. And it's going to destroy us over time. And it's kind of our own fault. So we have to look, take that hard look in the mirror. So I want to go a little bit deeper here though, Randy. Like talk to me about, so let's say we've got people, and I think this is reasonably common out there. We've got folks who they're doing good work. They really are setting good priorities. They got good people on the team. They're doing a good process, all those first three things. And yet this problem remains. So very likely it is a perception problem. What do we do about it?
Glad you asked. Sorry. I feel very cheesy, but I'm going to do the self-promo thing for a moment. So I put together a canvas for this. Please. I know. So I put together a canvas for this. It's called the product development, the product experience canvas. And the idea here is it's worth doing it yourself. It's got those 4 boxes on there of priorities, people, process, and perception, and with some trigger questions for you. And it's worth sitting down and doing it by yourself. It's a good exercise to spend 15 minutes every once in a while looking at this and saying, what's holding us back? Or do I actually have good answers to these things? Do I know what's going on? And just pick 1 or 2 things that feel like they're holding you back. It's worth doing it with your team at retros every once in a while, but it's also worth doing it with your stakeholders sometimes. Where I've found this to be the best value for me is there are times where I've had partners in the company that I did not get on with. Mm-hmm. We did not agree on things. It was holding the team back because our functions weren't working well together. And try as I might, I couldn't sort it out. It wasn't something that was working using my normal techniques. Bringing this approach changes it. Because now I'm not talking to the stakeholder and arguing back and forth with them about things. We're trying to put something down on paper and say, what is it that you see? What is it that I see? What is it that we both see that is causing problems? What is it that we're actually trying to get to? And let's make sure that then we talk about how do we work together to do that? Mm-hmm. It's not always going to be easy. Sometimes you might need a third party to get involved. If you and your CTO, for example, aren't getting on, then maybe you need a CEO, CFO, COO, somebody like that to come in, or a coach or facilitator to come in and help facilitate the conversation. It's not always going to be easy. We don't choose the people we work with all the time. That's the way they pay us. Mm-hmm. But it's just a framework for having the right discussion, making sure that you've got something down on paper that you can agree to work on together, and say, right, over the next couple of months, this is the problem we want to solve. This is what we want to commit to, whether it's us directly or getting our teams to do it, getting other people involved together. But we're going to try and make this better. And having that conversation makes a massive difference. You're heard, they're heard, more importantly, and you hear them, and you've got a commitment from them of what it is that they want to be fixed. It's not always going to be easy. It's not always going to be perfect. Not everyone is perfect and honest, and we're not always great at these conversations. But it's better than what I was doing before.
It's using our empathy. We would never, if somebody said about a customer, right? If like a PM on our team or an engineer said about the customer, like, oh, they just don't get it. They just don't get it. You'd be like, okay, that's not an acceptable answer. Like, that's not their, it's not their job to get it. It's our job to make it obvious for them and intuitive for them. Mm-hmm. It's like, well, what if we what if we held ourselves to that same standard with everyone else in our company, right? What if our CFO what if it should be as easy for our CFO or for sales to understand the value of what we're doing as it is for a customer to use the product and get the value they want from it? So I love this idea of like taking an empathetic approach and getting out of our, getting out of our own little orbit.
I've had a few clients lately where I've been running discovery courses with them, and not everyone is customer facing, not everyone is a product manager, but the principles of discovery work regardless. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that we've talked about is, it's Teresa Torres is as smart a person as it comes to with this, but all of her techniques work just as well on internal customers, on your internal stakeholders. There's nothing wrong with trying to sit down and do motivation mapping about them, making sure you understand what it is they're trying to do, what they want, making sure you talk to them at least once a week. All of those things are just as valid and just as useful. Mm-hmm.
One of the things I've noticed as well, whether it's Teresa's approach or Itamar's with the evidence guided book, like any of these things, we're all, using different language to kind of point at the same principles. One of the things that I found is that almost everybody responds to empathy and curiosity. And most people are far more reasonable and rational than we want to give them credit for when we're upset. And so if we actually invite them into a conversation that's a little more evidence-based, they're often willing to play ball with that, if we do that from a stance of curiosity and empathy.
Yeah, one of the techniques I like the most is if you're having trouble with people, or even better, when you first go into a company or a team or an area, sit down with all the stakeholders and do an informational interview and explain to them, this is informational. I want to, from an OODA loop perspective, I want to orient myself. So I need certain information from all of you. I'm going to do the same questionnaire with all of you. And one of them is, what is it we're trying to do here? What is the definition of success? What is your bonus based on? Things like that. What do you see as the biggest problems right now? Asking those questions, because if you find out that you're getting totally different answers from people who are stakeholders, from people who are partners, then you've got a totally different problem. It's not just figuring out who to make happy. It's figuring out how are you going to reconcile this? It's whether you may be going to someone higher up the food chain than you to say, we've got this problem. We need a bit of a workshop. We need to get everyone together to agree on what we're trying to do. It might be just saying, okay, maybe the person there before you or the way the environment was set up was lots of one-to-one conversations. Maybe it's just bring them all into a room together and saying, this is where we are right now. This is a proposed pathway, but I want to hear all your thoughts together on it. There's lots of things you can do to make it obvious why decisions are being made, solicit other people's involvement, and try and change the environment and the way things are working so that you can have better conversations.
Yeah, I want to talk more about changing the environment here in just a second, but really quick, just to give people a few more actionable handles on that. Like, what else would you ask in that informational interview? Because I think it's a brilliant technique.
I've actually got a sheet on this one as well. I'll give you the link later on. But yeah, I specifically ask questions about what is it that they're working on right now? What are the biggest problems that they see at the moment? What is their current goal for their team? What is their goal and ask of my team? Actually, one of the best questions that came up with from someone else was, we have that Columbo thing of you always at the end of an interview ask, is there anything else I should have asked you?
Yeah.
What else should I know? And this great person, Kit, said, you should ask me how I like to be communicated with.
Oh.
And I loved that. And she was absolutely right. It was, she had just come from one company, since taking over something else. They were using archaic systems that she hated. She said, just WhatsApp me. Just Slack me or WhatsApp me. I won't respond to anything else very well. That's the best way to get me. I really appreciate you communicating with me that way.
Love it.
And things like that. Or how often do you want to be communicated with? What kind of decisions do you want to be involved with? Things like that. It's really valuable because we get our communication tone wrong with people all the time. And just asking them, it makes a big difference, especially at the beginning of a relationship.
Oh, 100%. 100%. It actually really reminds me of, there was a great article years ago. I think it was on the First Round blog. I remember doing this. It was like the indispensable document every manager needs. It was basically saying like, hey, let's say you just got into a new role. Write like a one sheet or a one pager on yourself that you can give to the people you work with. And it's like everything they need to know about working well with you. Right? What are your communication preferences? How do you like feedback? Where are your sensitivities so they can, be responsible about that? What are you most worried about? Like just kind of all this essential stuff that you would love to know about somebody you're really trying to work well with. And it's like you can lead with that and open that door. And if you show someone a document like that, I think most people will probably respond really well and offer back a lot of the similar information, which you also want.
Yeah, I love the manager readmes.
Thank you. That's such
I think
a better way to say
really
it.
good thing. In fact,
The manager
we do
readme.
well. That's why I've heard it called before. And we actually talked to Diana Stepner last night about this, about people first leaderships and how to do that. And manager readmes came up from her too. There is a bit of an issue I've seen sometimes with it, where it can be seen as a bit presumptuous when you just hand someone else and say, "This is how you need to act with me." So I would always lead by asking them first and then following up with my README afterwards, or figuring out, is it best to just hand them a document or to talk them through it? But the act of sitting down and writing yourself is really useful because it tells you how you want to communicate it to other people.
Just like anything else, the act of writing itself is thinking. It clarifies how we think about things, helps us understand ourselves better, which is, only going to help us work better with our peers. It also reminds me of, I'm looking at this book on my bookshelf right over here, that I read so many years ago, but it was actually really helpful. It was called Mastering Project Management. And it's like, in product land, we're very squeamish about ever being, considered like a project manager, but it's like, that is a key part of everything we do. We got to get stuff done. And I remember in that book, the most useful thing I got from that book was there's a template in there for what he calls a roles and responsibilities conversation. And it's been over the years, like one of the single most useful things that has ever helped any difficult work relationship is you just sit down with this person and you just draw 3 columns on a whiteboard or Miro or whatever. And you just talk about it. You just say, okay, great. Like, hey, I just want to get clear. So we're clear here with each other. Like, what am I responsible for? What are you responsible for? And what do we have to share responsibility for? And just because I'm responsible for something doesn't mean you don't have input or say on it and vice versa. But it means I've got, at the end of the day, it's on me. And it almost doesn't matter, I find, where things end up in those columns. What does matter the most is that you have the conversation and make it explicit.
Yes. Yeah. Having every tool that I use, every tool that I come up with or recommend is always in service of how do we have better conversations with people that will clear up. So, I don't know, as product people, we don't do much. I mean, we do a ton, but we aren't responsible for actually producing something ourselves by ourselves. I think the only thing we're really responsible for is creating better environments, creating better understanding, and having better conversations. I'm going to reference 3 people in a row. I love giving credit to other people, but so much of what I do is referencing other people. So let's see. Wonderful product person here in the UK named Monica Turska. When I asked her, to describe what is it that product managers do, what is it that we actually do, I always had a very flippant answer that my wife liked, which is I go to meetings so other people get work done.
Okay.
Which is kind of true functionally, but it's flippant. It's not very helpful. It's not very useful.
Yep.
Monica's line is so much better, and I use hers now, is we help people make better decisions faster.
Yep.
Sometimes we make them, but a lot of times we're facilitating it. And to have those conversations, the next one I want to talk about is Christina Watke also has some really good stuff in her last book about a team charter, team canvas, roles and responsibilities, all those kinds of things. I love the stuff that she's got. And a guy over here in the UK, again, Roman Pickler, if you know him, Roman's got something on his site in his resources, a decision-making guide. And it's a little more specific about product management than I like, but I love the idea of it. And it's helping people to remember sometimes you can make a decision and then inform people. Sometimes you need a unanimous consent in advance. Sometimes you need informed consent. But think about the type of decision that you're empowered to, when you have a decision coming up, is this one you're empowered to make? Is this one that you have to get unanimous consent, majority consent, informed consent? Things like that. It's really useful as a flow chart to just remember sometimes you can do this stuff, or sometimes you need to be really careful and have those in-depth consultations first.
No, I love that. We will link to all that stuff in the show notes, including the conversation I had with Christina on this podcast a long time ago. She was one of the first guests I had on. She was very gracious with her time when this show was just a little infant. No, I really love what you're pointing at. It's something I've been thinking a lot about, actually. A recent episode on this show was with a wonderful coach named Pam Fox Rollin. And she's an executive coach, does a lot of work in Silicon Valley. She and her partners recently put out a book called Growing Groups into Teams. And it's a fantastic book on leadership. Ooh. Love it. Highly recommend it. And we'll link to all the stuff in the show notes. But one of my favorite line of that entire book, and it so resonated with me, and I when I got a chance to talk to her about it, she's like, yep, that's the core of it, was this answer to the question of what is it that leaders do? Right? That's an old question. And there's been many cuts at that question over the years. And my new favorite answer comes out of their book. And that is that leaders build futures that matter through conversations.
I like that.
And I was like, oh man, that is so good. And then when I started to map that into product, I'm like, well, what is it then product leaders do? I'm like, well, we build products that matter through conversations because we have to talk to all these people to build a product and get them to build a product that matters, to build a future that matters. and we have to do it through conversations. So I love what you're pointing at here with the decisions and the discussions. It's really resonating for me.
Yeah, I don't think that's, I do anything else at this point. I mean, whether it's communities or advisory work or anything else, I have conversations with people to try and help them have better conversations with other people, or I facilitate conversations for them, because it's really difficult for people to change relationships with others if they have to be both a facilitator and a participant.
Yeah.
So sometimes bringing in an external facilitator, whether it's someone in your company or someone external, it's a really valuable thing. It makes a big difference. And sometimes it's the only way to change the conversation or to change the relationship.
Yeah, I've seen that as well, because in some of the advisory work I've done with clients, like half the time I'm like, wow, what is it I'm actually doing here? And sometimes I'm just holding a frame and stewarding a conversation along because they can't, because they're too in the conversation. And it can be amazing that that's the thing that makes the difference. But I want to pivot here really quick and go a little bit deeper into this idea of changing the environment. It's something we were touching on a little bit earlier. And we talk about, think about culture change. Environment change is sort of a notoriously hard thing, or at least it's perceived that way. How do you think about it?
I think recently I've come to the realization that every engagement I have, because I'm not doing line product management anymore, because I'm either doing leadership or coaching and advisory with leadership, or even if I'm coaching and advising individual product managers. But what I've come to realize is every project, no matter what everyone else thinks it is a transformation project. Product people are transformation managers. We're change agents by definition, because we're brought into a company, even if they have good innovation processes, good product processes, we're being asked to fundamentally change the product that there is, to add new features, to change the way it works, to take away old features, which is both shipping code, but it's also changing behaviors within the company. It's changing the way that the operational works. The other side of it is a lot of times we're also being asked to change how things are delivered, the process of going to market and rolling it out as well. It's not enough to just put code into production. That doesn't deliver value. Getting sales, getting marketing, getting support, getting everyone else on side to really understand this is a critical part of the job. So what you're doing is change management or transformation all the time. Years ago at one of the Mind the Product conferences, they had someone in who asked everyone to raise their hand and say, how many of you are in sales? And like 2 people raised their hand and said, wrong, you're all in sales. And I've been to other seminars that say that, and I don't like that framing of it. I totally get the message. A lot of our job is convincing people. And there are amazing sales techniques that we really should learn that are of incredible value. I don't want to think I'm in sales though. I want to stay in product and in advisory and in the areas I'm doing. I know I'm selling myself, selling my services, selling my company all the time, but I like to think of it as more of change and transformation management. And that way I'm a partner rather than, and the best salespeople are partners as well. And, tars and feathers people to say sales is slimy and evil. They're not. They can be, but I've met some terrible, slimy product managers and delivery managers and engineering managers too. No one has a monopoly on being on the side of the angels.
That's a nicer way to say it than I was going to say it, but I like your way. Yeah, no, that's really well said. So, if we take this as a given that we are all in product change agents, catalysts, call it whatever you want to call it, how do we actually do it? Because it is a hard thing. And I know we've been speaking about perception, so that's clearly a piece of it. But to make this a little more tactical for people, how should we think about actually approaching this in our work, especially, assume we're stepping into a new role, for example?
Yeah. I think it comes back down to a couple of things. So perception and empathy are really the key things. What do people really want, and working with them to help build the trust, get yourself onto the positive side of the trust bank before you make withdrawals from it is a really key thing. And we say that a lot, but we usually start with, well, they hired me, so they must want this. And there's a big difference between a company saying that they want something and actually believing it and following through on it.
Yep.
And it's hard.
It is.
The people I see who are best at this are the ones who pay real attention to it, who build the relationships, build the empathy. They don't assume that they have buy-in or permission to do things. They work their ass off to create it. The other side of it is patience and grit, and, the resilience side. And I know that's come up, with, we both did the SVPG workshop, for coaches last year. And that came up a couple of times. It's incredibly important. This job is so hard. It is so frustrating. Even the best people, especially the best people, know this one. I had an amazing boss years ago at an enterprise who was the calmest person I've ever met. And every single day he lost battles, but he also won battles. And what you would see is slowly but surely over the course of a year or two, he would win the wars. And I hate the battlefield metaphors, but the point is he didn't get frustrated, not publicly anyway. He never really let it faze him. He understood there was a much bigger picture, and he could afford to be gracious and lose on some things because it didn't matter. He was trying to set up enough things and do enough work in the background to set things up so that eventually, inevitably, it would go in the direction that he was recommending. Even if other people couldn't see it right now, in the longer term, it would go the way. But if he had the right strategy, it was it was better to keep his, again, battlefield metaphor, better to keep his powder dry and wait for the right opportunity instead of trying to push it and destroying a relationship.
So this boss of yours, it reminds me of one of the best bosses I've ever had as well. Very similar dynamic. He just seemingly unflappable, right? Just so calm, cool as a cucumber. And I know he got frustrated, but it reminds me of something I was thinking about recently. Like, we talk a lot. I wrote a short little newsletter nudge recently about like equanimity. And it's a word that doesn't get used a lot in our circles. We talk about resourcefulness. We talk about being relentless. Like Paul Graham of Y Combinator, right? He's said for a long time that being a great founder, that the core thing is to be relentlessly resourceful. And I think that totally applies to product people like you're pointing to. And I think one of the things that really helps in being relentless in that way is, that doesn't always mean that you're pushing as hard as you can in every single moment, right? That can be a recipe for burnout. But it's this idea of equanimity, which for me, my personal connection to that comes out of my meditation practice and Buddhism. And, it's a big word in that world. And the definition of equanimity is mental calmness, composure, and evenness of temper, especially in a difficult situation. And I can't think of anything more helpful for doing this really hard job than that.
Yeah, remembering that the job isn't all there is, that you have friends, you have family, you have hobbies, you have things outside of it is really helpful. It can be really hard. We had Marty Kagan on the podcast, on our podcast a while back, and we challenged him about something that was in one of his books, and he's since walked it back, or clarified it is probably a better way of putting it, which is the problem is, though, that people had misinterpreted this for a long time. And it was the idea that to be a good product manager, you had to work a ridiculous number of hours, on the order of 80 hours, 60 to 80 hours a week.
Right.
And that meant you couldn't also have a life outside of work in a proper way.
Right.
You had to be too involved. And what he clarified is, this is an anti-pattern. This is not a good thing. This is what he's observed most of the best product managers doing. It isn't a recommendation. And the reason that most of them had to do it is because they were doing two jobs. They were doing the product job and the project or delivery job as well. I don't know how common it is where you are, Andrew, and the clients you've got and the people you talk to. But here in the UK, delivery management, I've worked with some amazing people, and it is an art. And absolutely. I always recommend getting a good delivery manager on your team or as part of a program. They don't necessarily, it's not like a scrum master. You don't necessarily have to have a one-to-one relationship between a product manager and DM, but having the appropriate people at the right levels, making sure that things get shipped and working with the teams to get that going is incredibly important. And it frees up the product manager to actually do their job. There's been a lot of talk, if you want to talk about the, year in review type stuff.
Oh, yes.
There's been lots of talk about Brian Chesky this year and what Airbnb did.
I was wondering when we'd go here.
I know we talked about this ourselves. Yeah, I know, but we talked about this ourselves the other week in a private conversation. I think there's a lot of misinterpretation. Now, I don't know Brian Chesky. I don't know anyone at Airbnb. I don't know what's going on behind the scenes. But what I saw publicly was an admission that they hadn't empowered the product managers to do the right job, that they hadn't created an environment where product teams could be successful. And they were reorganizing things in such a way that product managers could actually do the really important work of working on strategy, of working on ideas, of coordinating what to do and making sure the teams were working on the right things and empowering the dev teams to get on with delivering it. I think it's a really positive thing, the way they've done this, and the fact that they've recognized that this was a problem, that the strategy alignment and coordination, the conversations at that level weren't happening, and changing the structure of the organization to go for that. It's messy, but I think it's a really good thing. And I wrote an article about this a while ago about how, Twitter or X or whatever you want to call it is a dumpster fire right now. Airbnb is in the stages of reclaiming and getting on the right track. And Tumblr, of all places, published this amazing thing about this is what we're trying to do. This is at the high level what our core goals are. These are the 2 or 3 things we're doing in each area to try and meet those goals. And now we're going to get out of the way and let our teams actually do it. And the maturity to be able to communicate that not only within the company, but publicly, that's a lot of work to get to that level of management maturity.
Totally.
And I think that's where we want to try and get these people to. That's our job. If we can get companies to that, then we're doing a great job. It doesn't matter if we're sitting there and know about every single feature. If we can do that, then we're doing the right job.
Yeah, I think that's well said. The whole Airbnb thing, there's been such a defensive reaction within the broader product community, and I think it's because I think it goes back to everything we've been talking about here, right? It feels like our professional identity is under attack and that people are questioning our value. And, to some extent they are. And that's honestly, that's an okay thing for management and leadership to do. Every part of the business has got to contribute and drive ROI and back to perception of value. If they're not perceiving it, then that's a real problem, and it's fair for them to consider it. But I think for a lot of us, a lot of product folks, it triggers our insecurity, and then we get very defensive and reactionary, but we don't really stop to consider, is there any truth to what they're pointing at?
Yeah, we have to realize that every founder did our job at one point before handing it off. And they probably knew, if they're not the technical founder, then they knew they had to hire devs to do the engineering work. They knew that they could probably get someone off Fiverr or something like that to do design work up to a point, and they probably have some great ideas and they want to be the art director, but they know they're not going to make the pixel perfect designs on a regular basis. But product management, because we don't have a tangible, shippable thing that we uniquely do, if you fire a product manager, it's going to take a while before you really notice the effect. And you may have done the job ahead of time. And it's we know what to ship. Just do the thing I said, just what my mom said, what my last client said, whatever. It takes a while for our value to be missed. If they even recognize it as such. So it's hard to get there. So we have to have that perspective ourselves and that understanding. What is it that people need from us? And it's not an us and them business and tech side of things. It is, how do we create a team where people understand that we have that empathy? We are working very consistently with them to help and make the right decisions faster.
Absolutely.
So one of the things I've got is a different definition of a product team than most people have. Most people say, it's a product manager, design and research, a copywriter if you're lucky, and engineering manager and devs, design, delivery manager, whatever. To me, that's just a group of people that are going to put code into production and make it pretty if you're lucky. I don't think that's a product team. I think a product team is a group of people who can do 4 things. They can ask a question, get an answer, understand the answer, and make a decision, take action based on that answer. So that means, if you are customer facing, that means you've got sales, you've got support, you've got marketing, you've got legal, all as part of your team in the room making decisions. Maybe not every single day. That doesn't mean they have to come to stand up and do Jira tickets and things like that. But it does mean that they need to be there at the quarterly planning at the very least to say, what is it we're trying to solve? what are our OKRs? What does success look like? And what are we going to judge ourselves on? And how are we going to work together to do that? And you all have to know each other's name and be able to coordinate with each other on a regular basis. And that comes from Jeff Patton. I think it's a 4-sentence version of a long talk that he did that I saw years ago. And I've loved it ever since.
Yeah,
I'm
just going to borrow that too. Yeah, like I love it. You have a question, you can get an answer, you can understand the answer, you can make a decision, and you can take action on it. So for me, it's 5 bullet points, but that's a beautiful synopsis. And it's funny, what you just said there, it really speaks to, I want to give a shout out again to the conversation I had with Pam Fox-Rawlin that we'll link to in here. One of the things in their book, Growing Groups into Teams, the fundamental question there is, well, what's the difference? How do what's the difference between a group and a team? And the answer that came out of that I really liked was that that what really makes a team and not just a group of people, like a working group, is 2 things. Like, first is a shared promise. And secondly is a commitment to coordinate to deliver on that promise. And that's what I hear in what you were just pointing at, right? Like you've agreed, we are signing up for something together, that we are going to do this thing together. And then we have agreed we are going to work it out together and collaborate and do what we got to do to deliver on that promise. And so going back to Christina Woodkey, it's like shipping code it's not done when the code ships. It's done when you do the thing, when you solve the problem, right? If no progress has been made, the job is not done.
When value is realized, absolutely. It's a challenge, and this is the challenge we've all signed up for in product roles. This is not a line management job.
Nope.
That's not what this is about. It's not about who reports to you. It's about who you can influence and how you can make a difference. And it doesn't matter what your title is. If you can't get the right people in the room and help them to make a decision, then you're not doing it well enough.
Yeah. It's like, ultimately what has to happen is you have to get the right people in the room, make a decision, and get it into action in order to deliver progress, i.e. value. Until that happens, the job ain't done.
That's it.
All right. I feel like we should just drop our mics right now. So
yeah, I think we've solved it.
Great, done. Put a pin in it. But yeah, just one other thought that occurred to me as you were, a few minutes ago, you were talking about how it takes a while, it can take a while for folks to realize the missing value of product, right? Like every founder said, well, I did that job once. And so I have my quick question there is, what is it that you think they perceive, at first? Like if they think, oh, it's so obvious, just go do this. To them, that probably is true. And then what is it you think they'll notice in, let's say it's a few months? What will become very obvious to them that isn't obvious now is maybe another way to say it.
Yeah, I think this comes up a lot of times when companies are scaling. Because when you're small, you can take a lot of shortcuts. You can decide something in the morning and have it shipped that afternoon because you only have one customer or no customers, and it's a very tangible thing. And there's only a few of you sitting around the table, so there's not too much to coordinate, virtually or in reality. And as you start to scale, you have all kinds of other things. You have operational responsibilities. You have multiple customers. You have second and third and fifth and sixth order effects of something. You can't keep the entire system in your head anymore. So you have to have conversations. You have to have check-in points. And it's not necessarily as easy to do this as you start to grow. But if you're no longer involved in some of these day-to-day conversations, if you don't see the complexity of the system now, then it's easy to fall back on, well, we used to do it this way. These people I hired must not be as good as I was at it. So it takes a while and there's a lot of maturity to understand, no, this is a much more complicated system. You still need to see change at pace sometimes. And we put process in the way of things where sometimes we treat things that are at an early stage like they're at a late stage. And we put in levels of governance that we don't need to for trying things. We need to find the balance between how can we experiment at pace? What is good enough sometimes versus what is good? What is a two-way door versus a one-way door decision? All that kind of stuff. But it's really hard when you don't give people enough context to make the decisions.
Right.
There's a metaphor I heard someone talking about how you run a company, and sometimes it's a street plan where you've got roundabouts, and sometimes it's where you have red lights. And red lights means you have to stop and wait for a green light. Even if no one's coming from any other direction, you have to stop and wait. So maybe that's like you have to wait for the governance meeting that might be next week. to make a decision. And then you have to wait for the next governance meeting from another team to make another decision. And, so nothing ever gets shipped. It takes forever to do anything. But that's also something that needs to be done in a highly regulated situation or a low context situation where people don't understand the consequences of their actions and they're not communicating well. Roundabouts is when you get to a certain decision point, you have to look both ways and you have to make the judgment call yourself. And maybe you communicate the decision you made, and someone will call you and say, hey there, wait a minute, before you get too far down the line. You're being empowered to make a decision and go for it if no one else is coming, if there's nothing else right. It's hard. It takes a lot of responsibility. It takes a lot of trust, and it takes a lot of context to make that work. But if you can build a roundabout-based culture, then you're empowering people. Definition of leadership that I really like is the ability to delegate decision-making effectively. If you have created a culture where people at multiple levels are more often than not making the right decisions and that you don't need to be consulted as a stopper before they make these decisions, then you're building a company that's able to be nimble, that's able to be agile, that's able to react and be more successful.
I love it. It's also, by the way, a really good acid test of your strategy, and if you actually have one, because if you have a strategy, but it still requires everybody in the company to get into a room to make a decision, that's not a very useful or effective strategy. And it's not helping better decisions happen faster, especially as the company grows and we have to have more decentralized decision making. So yes to everything you just said. And I love that metaphor of traffic lights and roundabouts. That's a great metaphor. Thank you. Thank you for that.
I wish I knew who to give credit for on that one.
Hey, Randy, this has been so great. And I always, every time we're talking, I just want to keep talking. But, at some point we have to sign off and you need to go eat dinner. So I just would, first of all, thank you for everything you're doing as a community builder, as someone contributing to our field, and just always being a pay it forward kind of person. So first off, thanks for everything you're doing. And I guess just in closing out, what would you like to leave listeners with?
Well, first, I want to thank you because every conversation I have with you, I walk away having learned something. So this is right back at you. And one of the best things I got out of participating in Marty and the Silicon Valley Product Group's Coaching the Coaches course was this amazing community of other coaches that I get to hang out with and learn from all the time.
Yeah.
In terms of what I want to leave people with, just remember, this is a really hard job. It's okay to question yourself and ask these questions. You don't always have to have the right answer straight away. You have to be able to work with other people to get to the right answer, though. And a lot of that is about conversations and relationships. Competence is there. You can't not show up. You can't not be able to deliver, but you have to be able to do it in a way that works with people. And that's almost even harder.
Beautifully said. Beautifully said. It's conversations with people that ultimately deliver value. And that's the thing. Right on. Well, Randy, thanks again for being here and keep doing what you're doing. We'll see you out there in 24.
Fantastic.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this, I'd be so grateful if you could do me a favor and take about 25 seconds to leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. That helps me reach way more listeners, and it also helps me bring you more great guests. As always, please feel free to reach out to me anytime at connect@makethingsThatMatter.com. And until next time, my friends, leave them better than you found them. See you out there.